Okay, so we jumped into server one. I guess let's double check what we did on Wednesday. What did we do on Wednesday? You remember? I spent a little bit of a time, but so we shared. We originally had to create a storage pool. We had it in a second hard drive. We created a storage pool. We installed some server roles, one of them being data deduplication. Data deduplication, that's hard to say. And we created a virtual disk and formatted it on top of our storage pool. We shared out a public folder, and we made a bunch of files on that public folder. Take up about 1 gig of space. I think I ended up with about 1.2 gig. I have refreshed my server manager, and current deduplication rate is still sitting at 0. I told you that it would be Monday because it had to have 3 full days. So probably tonight at 1:45 a.m. will be the 3rd day, and it'll start working on the data deduplication. So Monday in class, we should have some magic. There's no magic today. It's still just sitting at the same boring spot it was on the other day. So let's check out our Active Directory users and computers, make sure everybody's on the same page with it. So Active Directory users and computers, we have an organizational unit that we created for sales. And we have 2 user accounts in there, Jane Doe and John Doe. We have an organizational unit for servers. All the member servers in our company are put in there, which just in our case is 1, server 3. And then we have workstations where we have 1 workstation called client 1. So everybody got that? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. And I'm going to minimize my server manager. I'm going to launch. We installed Visual Studio Code into our server 1. I'm going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio Code. I'm going to see if I can use PowerShell to query the database for the user account information. Like, why would you want to do that, Mr. Goodman? You can just use Active Directory users computers and view them. Well, if you have thousands of them and you got to do some changes to them, PowerShell and scripting is a lot better method than trying to go in and click on 1,000 different users and make a change to them. I had a student that worked for IT. It was like a student worker, and he had actually got a job over the summer full-time with them. There was something that needed to be changed in all the user accounts. I don't remember exactly what it was. There was some field that had to be updated. And there was like around 5,000–6,000 students across all 4 campuses, across, typically a 2-year degree. So he spent the entire 3 months going through every single user account and making whatever change and updating them, or almost all, at least half the summer. I looked at him and said, why did you do that? I showed him about 3 lines of code that he could have typed in and done the whole thing in a couple of minutes. So his exact problem, like, here's how I would have done your problem. And he just, that's like, really? So with our PowerShell, I think it may have been Monday, we wrote a question. We developed an if statement We did an if statement. We did a little test. We determined if something was true or not. And if it was true, we did some code. If it was false, we did some other code. Y'all remember that sample up there? Okay, well, I'm going to open up another window, and just in case you wanted to keep that on your screen for an example, I'm going to open a new file. And I'm going to save the file as a PowerShell, so my syntax highlighting and everything will be correct. Let's name it I don't know. Kind of named it script 1, script 01 or something, whatever. Sounds good. Okay, so I want to get the information about the users out of Active Directory via using PowerShell. So I'm going to use a get verb followed by a dash, and then I get a big list of probably about 100 different get commands that I could run, maybe even more than 100 of them. So I'm reading through the first list here. There's a get dash, and the first grouping here is AD. I wonder what AD stands for. Probably stands for Active Directory. So get AD, and like I said, there's a long list. I see a get AD computer down there, but I'm wanting to get the user accounts. So what happens if I type a U? If I type a U, the first up top of the list is get AD user. So let's try that command and see. So get AD user. If I just hit Control F5 and try to run it, notice it shows a little help there. There's 3 pages of switches I can add to it. But just try to run it by itself. Down in the console screen, what does it do? It asks me a question. It says I need to supply a filter. I'll look up there at my screen, the little help thing up there showing a filter is wanting a string value. So that must be a search. Maybe I could filter out by keywords or something like that. What if I don't want to filter out anything? What's the key? What's the special character that I don't want to filter anything out? Star? ASCII 42. Did we go over 42 as the answer to everything? Yeah. Asterisk. 42 is the answer to every. Let's see if that's the answer to this question. If I hit enter, it did. It answered it. So pretty cool. So up here in my script, I noticed there's a dash filter. So that must mean I have to always include filter with a star or some other type of string. Otherwise, it's going to ask me a question, and it's not going to be. It'll be interactive instead of just run. So I'll try that again. Control F5. It's going to run. And it's going to dump everything to the screen. At least some stuff to the screen about a user. Bring this thing up. We can see I see Jane Doe. I see John Doe. I see some other accounts up here. Let's look at the information we got about Jane Doe. So the account is got a distinguished name. This is how that it would be accessed via command scripting. CN equals Jane Doe, OU equals sales, DC equals Contoso, and DC equals.com. So it's the tree structure written backwards. That's the only weirdness about it. If you look at it in Active Directory, trying to access this through typing it out, you start at the deepest point, which Jane Doe is the deepest point into this tree structure. You actually list her out first as a CN container object, followed by the what is she inside of? She's inside of an organization unit called sales. And sales is inside of Contoso, and Contoso is inside of another top-level domain called .com. So you see how that's typed out at the command prompt. I see that we have a SAM account name is jane.doe, and a user principal name, jane.doe@contoso.com. Those are the two login that you can use. And I see a SID, a security identifier, a SID for short. That's a big long number. It has an S in front of it. Guess what? That's what the computer uses to track the user account on. When you set permissions on things, and you see on the, when we added administrators and everyone and stuff like that to the public share, it's not actually using those words when it stamps it to the hard drive. Is stamping whatever security identifiers associated with those groups or those user accounts onto the file. So for those of you that are taking database class, the SID is basically the primary key field. So it's non-changeable. It's unique. If you delete a user account, you cannot recreate that user using the same name and same password and expect it to be the same account, because it will be a new SID generated. And again, those in database, this is really great to take in database class, because you got your sequence generator that doesn't cycle. It never goes back and re-enters in the same identifier again. So yeah, that's your primary key. It's unique. It's what the user account. It makes it really easy. We can change the username. We can change the password, everything, every aspect about the user. And we don't have to worry about remapping it to anything, because all the other fields are not mapped to permissions, only the security identifier. It's almost like learning in Cisco. You have an IP address that your computer is actually being accessed as, but you're not typing IP address to go to google.com. You're typing google.com. You're typing the name. Like our Contoso. Contoso is mapped to the Microsoft's IP address. Also, Microsoft.com is mapped to them. So if you type Contoso.com or Microsoft.com, they both go to the same IP. Kind of what this sort of is. So you can change the name, and that SID is still locked there. So it's being utilized. So computers running on numbers. Yeah, they like numbers. So I'm really old. Like, what does that have to do with anything? An old security trick back in the 90s that they told us to do. Microsoft told us to rename the administrator accounts, like Bob Dole or something. I don't even know who Bob Dole is, but okay. Except for one of you. So, and then they wanted us to create a new account called administrator that didn't have any privileges. to help stop hackers from breaking into the computer system because they wouldn't know that the administrator account was a regular user. Well, hackers caught on to that trick really fast, as that was spread on all of the Microsoft's best practice thing to do for security. They got to looking at, how do we tell what the administrator account is now? And hackers got to looking at the security ID and found out that the administrator account always has 500 at the end. So they no longer needed to look for the word administrator. They just needed to look for the 500 and then translate what was typed here. And then they knew who the administrator account was. So yeah, they broke that quite quickly. So yeah, turn of the millennia, Microsoft was still saying, hey, that's a cool thing, but you look at the hacker field and like, that's just dumb. With all the password cracking tools you load up, dump the database into this cracking tool, and it would star all the administrator accounts or the administrator account and go, hey, this one right here, it's got the red 500, the reference ID. That's the what after the dash here, called the RID. And they found that. So some of these other tags here, some of these other groupings represent things like the domain, the forest, and maybe the site identifier. So these here are grouped based on different things. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting to point out. There's one thing you can do with PowerShell that you can't see through the graphical. Microsoft doesn't show you the SID anywhere in the graphical screen. Not any of the normal tools anyway. There's some tools you can view it, but the PowerShell brings that out really quick. So we're only seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're only seeing about 10 things per user account. But if we look at a user account, there's a lot more than 10 items that can be recorded and stored for that user account. All kinds of stuff. So there's a properties switch that lets us view specific properties for the users. If I add properties, and I use another answer to everything, asterisk, and rerun this script, I wonder what I'll get. A whole lot more. So it's going to scroll those user accounts again, but this time it's going to show us all of the fields that were possible. Things like street address, state, title. When the account was last created, when it was last changed. The last time the password was set. You're looking at that field going, how do you know when the last time the password was set? Out there is probably stored in the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. And the database class people, y'all remember me showing you the Y20 38 problem. And they've got it converted into human readable form up here with another field called password last set, January 29th, 10/19/55 a.m. So yeah, that's a whole lot more information that you can pull. But I pulled information about everybody in the database, including the built-in accounts and stuff. So what if I wanted to narrow this down and only pull the users out of the sales organization? I have a search scope that's showing up here on the screen. So let's add in search scope. Search, I think I want to use search base instead of search scope. Search, no, maybe search. Now, I've always used one of them and I don't, now I'm confused, but okay, let's just try it. Let's, inside of double quotes, we'll test it out and see if it works. So I'm on the search only for the sales organizational unit. So I have to use that syntax up here where I'm using the CNOU and stuff like that. So the sales organizational unit is an organizational unit. So I'll put OU equals and the name of the organizational unit, sales, followed by a comma. Sales is contained inside the domain Contoso, so domain container DC equals Contoso, comma, DC equals com. Jane Doe, and make sure just got Jane Doe and John Doe. John Doe. Yep. So search base was what I thought I was going to go with, but then like the search scope, go, wait a second. Okay, so that's cool. It limited down to only the people that are in the sales OU. Cool stuff. You can also let's change the properties and just look at SAM account name. Not case sensitive, but what happens if you were to do that? It doesn't just list all everything. It goes back just to the 10. Let's change it to city. See what happens. What happened when I include city? City was, yeah, added on to the other 10. So city was one that wasn't displayed by default. So if you want to view just one particular extra thing, you could do that. I'm going to go back to the asterisk though. Okay, so we built the PowerShell command to get information out of Active Directory. Now, how can this be useful? This can be useful, especially if you got to think that maybe there's thousands of users in here. This can be useful by actually storing it into what's known as a variable and then running other PowerShell code upon the variable to act upon each user a certain way. The first thing we need to do is, instead of just doing the standard output and pushing this to the monitor screen, we need to store the information into memory. So we have something called a variable. I mean, it's a name spot in RAM in the computer that you can put stuff into and change. To create a variable in PowerShell, you start with a $, followed by a name that you create. I'll create a variable called sales because we're getting the sales people. And I'll use an equal mark saying to assign everything that's from that command into the spot in RAM called sales. If I was to control F5 this, I will get a command prompt back and nothing to the screen. So it's now stored in memory of the computer, no longer displaying it to the screen. Now I can take this sales and do something with it because it contains all of the users and stuff in there. There could be some real simple stuff like $ sales. I could put a period and I could put out there a specific field that I wanted to see, like SAM account name. And if I run it, that's not going to work. Because there's more than one user inside of the sales. I doubt that'll work, but it would fail. When you have more than one thing inside of a variable, come up to a little bit of a problem. Computer doesn't know how to operate on 2 or 100 things at one time. The computer does things one at a time. So we're going to have to do some code and tell it, instead of trying to view everything in sales as one big block, we need to tell it to pull the first user out and do something with it, and then go back and get the next user and do something with it. So that forms into one of our PowerShell's most powerful features that it has, and that is the for each loop. For each is awesome, especially for what PowerShell does, because it's the piece of code that can go out and pull out Jane Doe, do something with Jane Doe, and then go back and pull out John Doe and then do something with him.
Hey, Mr. Goodman.
What was that?
Oh my God.
Hello.
Always happy with you.
So we'll do for each. I'll open up parentheses. I'm going to open up a curly bracket.
Mr. Goodman.
Yes.
I got this tab open and I can't collapse it. Here, I don't know.
So it's probably the debugging tab.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just click the little spider looking thing,
A bug.
and that minimizes the thing. Yep.
Gotcha.
It may not be reading. You have to hit Control F5 to run. If you hit F5, it brings the debugger out every time. A remote PC may not be reading your control key if you are doing that. I don't know. It may always pop out every time you try to run it. So this is the structure of the for each loop. The for each pulls things out, and then in between the curly brackets, you can run code to act upon the single item or the single user. And then it'll loop back through and get the next item until that it's empty. For each, inside of the parentheses, you have to have a new variable to store the single list, like your grocery shopping. You can't go to the grocery store and grab everything on the list with one hand and throw it into your cart at the exact same time. You got to go through the list, go down the aisles and pull bread off, and then go buy the milk and pull the milk off the shelf and put it into your cart. So that's what we're going to do here. We're for each, and I can do like $item. So if you can think of a grocery list, for each item on my grocery list, grab it, put it in cart would be the code. So for each item in sales, is how that's structured. The variable item could have been named anything. I could have named it squirrels or Scooby-Doo or Power Rangers, whatever. I would have used an underscore. I wouldn't have put a space anywhere. But for each item in sales, just kind of reads a little bit better. It kind of makes sense. For each item in shopping list, do something with it. It's now at this point that I can do $item. Anything inside the curly brackets will need to be acting upon the variable. That item variable is also locked to being used only within the for each loop. Sales is for being used outside of the for each loop. But anything inside the curly brackets, I now have to use $item instead of sales. So what is inside of here? All of these column headings for that one user is inside of there. And there's a cool little trick. If I want to just view one column's information and not all the other stuff, I can put a period and spell out the column that I want to print to the screen. At least that will give us some interesting stuff now on the screen. If I hit Control F5, it should print out Jane Doe and John Doe on the screen. So I can now act upon each user account individually. I could write a script here to go and change their passwords. I could write a script here to go change the phone number, change the office location. I'm going to add a clear host up here and run it again. It'll just be prettier. Beautiful. Let's look at a little bit different way. Let's pipe it. Let's pipe $item to a SQL query. Select SAM account name and city. Unlike SQL, I don't have to put from. All I have to do is tell it the columns to select because it's already been, the pipe is already feeding it the from statement. So there's a little bit different look. Or any city set? No.
How would you write the code to set the city?
So I can set the city. It's after I set the city though, it's not going to display the city field. If I do it inside this loop, it's going to loop through and it can grab and set each one. But as I display it for the first time, it's still got the information from line 2. So even though if I set the city and then tell it to display item, it hasn't gone back and pulled from Active Directory. That city has been pulled. So when I run it the first time after I set it, city is still going to be blank. I could write a write to screen city set, run again to see it or something like that. We're going to have to run this 2 times in a row to see that city is set. So we got to get up there, get Active Directory user, pull information. Guess what it is to make a change? Set Active Directory user followed by identity, and identity is the SAM account name. So I can do $ item dot SAM account name. It's already ran, so now PowerShell Code Studios recognize what's inside of $ item. So I can use tab complete on that, which is kind of cool. It doesn't show up, the first time we run it because it didn't know what was there. So set, I need the user identity, I need the dash, and if I start typing city, I find that there's a city switch in there, and we'll put BB as the city. So that'll set the user city to BB. It should. So hit Control F5 the first time around. It's still going to give us the same information. But if I run it a second time, or if I just go look at my users in here, see city is set BB. But I didn't have a visual on the screen because it's got to go back and rerun line 2 again. I could have run another for each statement down here, separate, and another sales right above it. But Control F5 shows BB there. The But yeah, if I wanted it to pop on the screen, I would have done. Could do this. I could copy that line and put it down here. And I could copy this. So instead of displaying there, we could come down here and set this to Little Rock. So it'd run through, it would pull information out of Active Directory. It would hit this for each loop. It would change Jane Doe. It would hit here. It'd say that there's still stuff in there. It'd come back up here and grab John Doe and change him. And then on line 8, it would re-query Active Directory, pulling the new information. And then it would hit this for each loop. And it would print out the information to the screen with the updated information. So if I run this, I should get Little Rock on the screen. Go straight to Little Rock. But that was the trick that I had to pull from Active Directory again. That can be hard to think about. I was like, well, why didn't it show updated? Because you didn't change anything in RAM yet. You know, to go pull the new information and update memory after the change. So UAMS, I know that they had like the 29,000 nodes on their network. That's devices, printers, computers, tablets, laptops, things like that. You can't deal with a network like that without scripting stuff out. You couldn't go make a change to 29,000 computers. They got a team of like 650 something plus IT personnel, but still dividing all of that out and knowing that everybody would do the right thing, you can't do that. So that's why PowerShell, that's why all of our advisory committee members, like, you need to tell them how to automate things with PowerShell. We've done something real simple here. This is an automation process. We pulled stuff out, made a change, possibly the hundreds of users. That's what the student did. I don't know if it was something real similar to this,
Right.
but he had to change something on everybody's account.
But did it one at a time.
He did one at a time. He had to go in and double click, and I don't know if he had to add them to a group or if he had to set like a specific description that they were a student or something had to be done so it like interacted with another program better or something like that. So we had to go in each one and like type something in and hit OK, and then go to the next one and type something in and hit OK. And it basically, I think it gave him a list of 1,000 users. And then once he got the 1,000 users, he had to tell it to load the next 1,000 users up because it couldn't even display all of the users that are in our Active Directory on the same screen. Like, dude, why did they make you do that? I know there's scripters over there.
Right.
Maybe they didn't have anything else for them to do, but I don't really believe that. IT always has something broken going to do. Or they just didn't like them. If they didn't like you or something.
Especially when it literally could have taken 10 minutes.
Yes. Yep. There's a couple of lines of code is
Pretty much.
amazing. So we're coming up here to break time. What I want to do at some point in time is I like scripting, sort of. I don't like programming, but I like some simple scripts. You can get some big, nasty, complex scripts that are so I want to show y'all So a script that I want to write later on, I've got this file that's got people's names in them. I've got their login name, their email address, an employee ID, their password, their employee description, whether they're enabled or not, what company they work for, what office that they're in, what division they're in, their office phone number, street address, city address, state, county, postal code, and the organizational path that they're supposed to be placed in. I've got all these users that I want y'all to create and enter in. There's only 100 of them. And all entered in correctly with all of that information. That sounds like fun, right? So you got a new user, add a user in, and then you'd go in and then you'd have to double click and fill out all the fields and all the address fields and all the organizational information, all the phone numbers. That'd take forever.
Yeah, or even just 100 users, that would take forever.
Yeah, well, think about here on campus. You register yourself through the Vanguard and type in all your information stuff, and then that's handed off to IT. Do you think they sit there and go no user and type your information in? They don't. When you set up for the class, now sometimes if you like mailed in something, then people in the admissions office would type it into the and set your stuff up in the Vanguard portal. But the IT department, no, they don't sit there and retype all the information that you or an admission person has typed in. The database generates a file like this, and the person that coded the database queried the output so these name columns would match the columns that you've seen when we grabbed it out of Active Directory. So display name, remember we use SAM account name? Yep. So all of those columns, that had to be coordinated with the database.
What's that file section? CSV.
Comma separated value. So comma separated value is each value is separated with a comma. So the first row is the list of all the attributes that a user account has, or columns that a user account has. And then each user account, each of the values is hit with a comma so that it matches, like name, and then display name would be Patricia Hennington, and then given name would be Patricia, and surname would be Hennington. There's another comma there for SAM account name. All that has to be matched up. It's real easy for a database to generate. If when I'm at a null, it would just be comma, comma, no space or anything, normally just comma, comma, and it would recognize that that was a null value.
The true value in there a lot.
Yeah, there's some true and false in here. It's easier to have Excel spreadsheet detected it real quick that it was CSV and columnarized it real quick. But there are some false things in here. There's some tricks. $true is, we have some trouble with a few of those fields. Where's my true? Enabled, is the account enabled, or is it maybe they're not going to come to work just yet? Maybe they're going to come to work a month from now. So those accounts are disabled, so nobody could sit there and try to hack into them, or the password might expire, the temporary password might expire before they come on campus or something. So, yep.
Easy peasy. No big deal.
So yeah, this is going to be, that's going to be some complex work there, because we got to get true We actually got to convert it from a string value because that is, it reads a CSV file and it stores it just as a string value. It doesn't store it as a Boolean true. There's actually a $ true that's Boolean true, but I've had PowerShell read that as just ASCII text, not a Boolean value. So we got to write code to fix that. The code for the password is another thing that's got to be messed with. Active Directory only accepts a pre-encrypted password. It doesn't accept the plain text. So we got to write some code to take the plain text and run it through an encryption algorithm to create an encrypted token. What else do we have to do? So I know that $sign's messed up and the password's got to be fixed. And I believe this path statement, it has some trouble with the path statement. But that's not too hard to fix.
If you were to import that the way it was, if the OU on it was new, would it create a new OU in your Active Directory, or do you need to create that for you?
No, I think it would have dumped them all into the users folder because that would not be found. It'd either fail or dump them into the users folder. So yes, that new would have to be recreated. We could write code to test for it and create it if it didn't exist, but that's, I've never done that. As there's just normally there's not that many organizational units that you'd have to create. So I always just created them by hand first. Then trying to write that many lines of code.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But for training purposes, if you're curious enough, might be something you want to do.
I'm not that curious.
You're not that curious? Why not? Okay, let's take a break. Okay, you ready to look at something else useful? In PowerShell? How many people finished their test out chapter 3? One? I shouldn't have much left, right? Hopefully. Um, so let's create another script. And let's save the script too.
I didn't have all that typed out on the first one.
Okay, well, let's write this one out and then I'll flip back to it.
Okay.
So for next week, we want to what in the heck? How to do that? I pasted tons of code. I'm going to give you time to do test out and finish it up for the rest of the class. And if you already finished with test out, we're going to try to be playing with next week. If you're kind of curious and want to do some searching, how would you possibly do something like that? You maybe even get as far as getting just the computer account names. You've seen how we got the user accounts. You kind of use that to maybe at least get the first part here, get the computer names from AD if you've already done test out. But I just make this note, so we'll work on that next week in class. And there's the other script that you can finish typing out for an example on how to pull stuff out of, at least users out of Active Directory. And then I'll give you the rest of the class period for getting the rest of the test out, chapter 3 due. That's due tonight. I think it's due tonight anyway, pretty sure it is.